Okay, so we're up to page Chaf, and that brings us up to the 8th of the 13 midos, 13 attributes of mercy that we're discussing here. And this one, the 8th one, is called Yichvosh Avanosenu, that God suppresses our transgressions. He quells our transgressions. Harei HaKadosh Baruch Hu misnaheg im Yisrael b'midah zo. God behaves with the Jewish people, interacts with the Jewish people in this manner. V'hisod kavishas ha'avon. And this touches upon the mystery, the secret of what's called the quelling of transgression. How does this work? Kihine ha-mitzvah hi kiparachach also nitza. A mitzvah has the power to fly upward and to blossom. Ubokas va'oila aden tachlis likones the fun of Yisbarach. And it has a special power to go up through the different spiritual realms until it actually reaches God himself. Interesting, on Tu B'Shvat, this day of Tu B'Shvat, we're talking about the growing of the trees and the fruits. And so the mitzvos are described as growing up from earth, penetrating the different levels of the spiritual realm until they actually blossom and bear fruit in that spiritual realm. That's the power of the mitzvos. So if you talk about the different worlds, the Atzilus and Bria and Yetzirah and Asiya, the power, the quality of mitzvahs are such that we can plant them, inseminate them into the world here, and they blossom and they grow and they level, they go up and up and up through the different hierarchy of the different worlds. That's all the power of mitzvahs. Umnam, havonos ein lehem knisa sham. Transgressions, averos, don't have any entrance there. So that only mitzvahs that a person does have actually power to penetrate that higher realm. But the averos are not able to do that. And generally speaking, there are 5 levels of soul. There's what's called nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechidah. 5 levels of soul according to the Kabbalists. Each level of soul is responsible for a different plane of human experience. Nefesh is sometimes called the animal soul because it shares in common what souls animals have in terms of energizing their physical physiologies and giving just the basic, vital force of life. So the nefesh is generally associated with running our bodily functions. Above that, you have the level of soul which is referred to as ruach. Ruach is spirit, and it's the level of soul which is associated with our ability to speak and have emotions. The third level of soul is that of neshama. Neshama is associated with our ability to think, human thought. Nefesh, ruach, and neshama are generally located within or about a person. The 2 higher levels of soul, chaya and yechidah, they are closer to God in the spiritual realm. So that the fabric or the matrix of these 5 levels of soul, nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechidah, these interconnected levels of soul actually connect a person here in the physical world to the source of physical and spiritual life on high, that's God. It is through this system of neshamas that the mitzvahs that we do are actually able to traverse through these different worlds and attain that very high place. The different levels of soul corresponding to the 4 different worlds. So that, for example, if the lowest of the worlds that we've discussed is Atzilus, is Asiya, that would correspond to the lowest level of soul, which is Nefesh. The world of Asiya is the world of physical finite creation. It corresponds to the lowest level of soul, which is connected to our physical bodies. Okay? Above that, we've said you've got the world of Yetzirah. Yetzirah corresponds to the level of soul having to do with what we call Ruach. And that is a very dynamic plane where a person's feelings and speech take place, corresponding to the dynamic of the divine energy being channeled down through that world above Asiya, which is Yetzirah. Above that, you've got Bria. Bria corresponds to the level of soul, which is Neshama. Neshama, like we said, corresponds to the plane of thought, and therefore it's related to the world of Bria because it is in that plane of Bria that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, as it were, thinks about the plan of creation, brings it into being, not in a physical sense, but in a conceptual sense, which earlier on in one of our introductory talks, we spoke about how Bria, creation, is really more a mental process than it is a physical process. The physical process is just the execution of the novel thought, the novelty of the thought. What's really creative, therefore, is the thought and not the act of creation. So therefore, you've got nefesh, ruach, neshama, corresponding to asiya, yitzira, and bria. Above that, you have the world of Atzilus, where Atzilus, we said, corresponds to the letter Yud in Hashem's name, right? Hey, Vav, Hey. Again, Atzilus, Yitzira, Bria, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama. Above that, you've got the Yud. The Yud has the 2 points. Each of those 2 points of the Yud, which is the highest of the 4 worlds of Atzilus, actually corresponds to 2 dimensions of that world of Atzilus. So it's really 4, which are 5. I've made just general reference to the upper and the lower apex of the Yud before. But now I'm going into more detail, where the lower part of the Yud refers to something what we generally call Atzilus. It's the divine, it's the emanation of divine energy down through the tip of the Yud, through the Hey, the Vav, and the Hey. The upper apex of that Yud is referring to another spiritual realm or concept, which is called Adam Kadmon. Adam Kadmon, pointing into the Ein Sof. Okay? These are terms that we've used and discussed in the past. But in any case, it's through this interconnectedness of the worlds, Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, and Atzilus, and our souls, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, and Chayan Yechidah, corresponding to the 2 points of that Yud. It's through that interconnectedness of the levels of soul and the worlds which enables our Maisim Tovim, our mitzvahs, and our learning of Torah to go up into those realms before Hashem Himself, into Ein Sof. It should be the case that the same should apply regarding Has V'Shalom, regarding the Averas that people do. The transgressions that a person do should also go into that realm through the same principle. But that's not the case. That's not the case. Generally, the idea is as follows. If nefesh corresponds to the physical plane, which is in the world of Asiya, all of the good mitzvahs that a person does, generated through the nefesh in his body, which is the world of Asiya, will be transmitted upwards. Similarly, all of the mitzvahs associated with the plane of emotion or thought, emotion might be the love or fear of God, speech, speech, saying things like prayer, the Shema, which I see you guys were working on during the break, brachas, or other mitzvahs that have to do with speech, would go from Ruach in that realm of Yetzirah on high. And the mitzvahs associated with thought, believing in God, for example, repudiating a belief in idolatry, the mitzvahs that are in the realm of one's thought, in the neshama, would also go up and be transmitted then into the world of Atzilus with its Yud and its 2 points into Ein Sof. All of that is true regarding mitzvahs. However, regarding Averos, that's not the case. Averos, which come about through the nefesh and the body, physical prohibitions, have an effect and a corresponding damage to the spiritual realm. The same thing applies in the realm of Ruach. Forbidden feelings or speech contaminates, pollutes the spiritual environment and has its negative effect. But it only goes as far as that. If a person starts doing damage in the realm of neshama, the plane of thought, God forbid, for example, repudiating the belief in God, so the result is not that bad thought will contaminate the world that corresponds to the plane of thought. Rather, at that point, what happens is the soul departs. The neshama departs. So a person will still have a nefesh and a ruach, enabling him to be involved in physiological functions and also to speak and feel. But what he's actually doing is he's banishing his holy neshama from him. Because the soul, the neshama, cannot tolerate becoming impure. As long as a person's involved in Torah study and mitzvos and purity, the neshama remains connected with the nefesh and the ruach, passing on their positive influences upward. But if has v'shalom, a person transgresses into the realm of thought, so the result is that he banishes his neshama. And this way, it's understood, in this way certain commentaries explain the teaching of Chazal, which say that the wicked, even when they're alive, are like they're dead. The wicked, even when they're alive, are called dead. Why? Because it's talking about people who are so wicked that their wicked thoughts actually banish the neshama. So spiritually speaking, they're dead. Physically, they're alive. Physically speaking, they're alive. But they're not very different than animals who are alive as well. But they're lacking the very unique human spiritual component, which is that of the neshama, because they've banished it. If a person does tshuva, so then the neshama is restored to its proper place, and again, the good things that he does can affect things positively. So that means if he transgresses on the plane of thought or speech or feeling, it has a negative impression on the world. Harmful thoughts also have a negative effect on the world here, but they cannot contaminate the world of Bria and upward. It's forbidden from entering there. Right? It can't go there. And that's what he's referring to here. That umnam ha'avonos enem knisa sham. Transgressions, they have no way of entering there into that very high place. Has v'shalom. Elokoiv sham shelo yikansu. Rather, God presses them down, suppresses them down, so that they may not enter there. Kireksiv, as is written in the verse, lo yigorcha ra. There will not dwell with you, God, any evil. It can't go into that place. It can go perhaps in the lower realms of Asiya and maybe Yetzirah, but it can't go into the realm of Bria and upwards. Lo yagur b'megorcha ra. There will not dwell in your dwelling place evil. That's how the Gemara in Shabbos explains that verse. Imken, if so, ein ha'avoin niknas pnima. Unlike mitzvos, transgressions cannot penetrate the inner dimension, the presence of God's unity. Only in the lower realms, where there is multiplicity, only there can evil exist. But it cannot exist in the place of Hashem. Yeah, what were we going to say?
Well, I was going to ask, I know that there's a few times in the Torah where it mentions your soul will be cut off from the Jewish people. Are they referring to a specific level? And how is it cut off?
Yeah, so different ways of explaining that. One way of explaining it is that kares is the cutting off that you're referring to is called karet, or kares, is mentioned in conjunction with the word nefesh in the Torah. So according to one way of understanding this is that what happens is that the nefesh, in fact I think we discussed it here, there are two ways of explaining the nefesh being cut off. If it's referring to the righteous, this kares is talking about, well, there are two ways of explaining kares. One is that the person's physical life is terminated and he dies. He's cut off. Okay. The second explanation is that spiritually speaking, the person's soul departs from him, right? Which is kind of probably what reminded you of of this, because is that's what we were saying earlier, is that the person's spiritual component is like cut off and separated, severed. It's true that there it's talking about the nefesh as opposed to the neshama, yeah. But the point is that just like you have spheros, which we've discussed, are interconnected, where the malchus of one level is actually within the keser of the one below it, right? So too, and each sphere is comprised of itself of 10 spheros. So you've got nefesh, ruach, and neshama. You've got aspects of the neshama in the nefesh, and then you've got aspects of the neshama and the nefesh. You've got aspects of the neshama in the ruach, and then you've got aspects of the neshama and the ruach in the nefesh. Yeah. So what happens is that the removal of the neshama actually has an effect on the ruach and on the nefesh itself. And that causes a severance between the nefesh and the level above it. The nefesh itself has its 10 spheros. And what's actually happening is the removal of neshama this is getting a bit complicated, I know. But the removal of the neshama is actually taking out the malchus of neshama from the keser of nefesh. Okay. Right? and that's a
So it
spiritual,
disconnects it.
and that's a disconnection. That's a severance.
Does that mean since the nefesh is your body, that doing if that happens to you, then doing like mitzvahs don't really count, like they're obsolete?
They're not in a situation where, let's say, a person is chayav kares, which means that he's being spiritually at least in one scenario, he's being spiritually cut off. It doesn't mean that he's totally severed. There's still a very tenuous connection, and that enables the person to do tshuva. So that even kares is something that a person can do tshuva for. Like it says, there's nothing that stands in the way of tshuva. Anything that a person does, he still has an option, still has the potential of doing tshuva. And therefore, even though I was describing how, for example, the keser, the malchus of neshama or of ruach is being severed from the keser of nefesh, there is still a light which is emanating from, that's how it's described, a light which is emanating from the malchus of neshama and ruach, which is illuminating onto the keser of nefesh. And it's a very tenuous connection, but if a person does tshuva, he's able to pull that connection back down. Which would mean then that even a person who is liable for the type of kares that we're talking about here, not physically being cut off by having his life taken, but rather spiritually being cut off, where he's walking around in a state of like spiritual mortality, he still has the ability to perform, to do Torah, to learn Torah, and to perform the mitzvahs, and that has an effect when it's coupled with tshuva of bringing about a recoupling, like this, so the connection take place again. And for this reason, it says, Sechar mitzvah bahai alma leka, that reward for mitzvahs in this world there is none, meaning the reward for mitzvahs is not in this world. What does this mean? That's because of the quality that he was just describing, that mitzvahs actually are elevated and rise to God himself. How can God give a person in this world the reward for mitzvahs which are translated into such a high spiritual realm? The entire physical world is not worth one beam of light which would be coming from the reward of those mitzvahs. So the author is explaining, therefore, what the sages mean when they say that a person does not get reward for mitzvahs in this world. The reward for the mitzvahs are something which are really spiritual, and by nature they are elevated to the highest spiritual realm. What's left for a person there in this world is something which the author, I think, will describe, but it's akin to what we're talking about, but it's akin to the idea that the reward for the mitzvah is not here. The reward for the mitzvah is not here. There is nevertheless a light which is emanating from that mitzvah, which can illuminate a person's life here. And it's compared to a candle. Like we say, Ner mitzvah, Torah or. Ner mitzvah, the candle is like a mitzvah, and the Torah is the light which is emanating from that candle. So that the mitzvahs that we do and the Torah that we learn are like a candle which is being ignited and lit into the spiritual realm. But even though that candle, even though that flame is really there, that's where it's lit, but just like a candle reflects its light to illuminate a dark place, so the light from the mitzvahs that we do and the Torah that we learn emanates to us into this world. But that's not the flame. That's not the candle. It's just the It's not the flame. It's not the candle. It's the light which is emanating from that flame. And therefore, like the candle, like the flame, the Torah and the mitzvahs that you do go up into the spiritual realm. We don't get reward. That stays there. That's the candle. That's the flame there. What we do get, however, is the light which is emanating from it into this world, which is like a place of darkness, illuminating this world with the light of that mitzvah that we do. Okay? But the actual reward remains for a person in the next world. The result of that would be then that if a person does an avera, he does transgressions, to a certain extent they'll be limited to, let's say, the lower realm, this physical world, or maybe the lower spiritual realm, but it can't go into that place. And therefore it's not going to affect the mitzvahs that we do. Right? The negative things that a person does cannot extinguish that flame. Why? Because it goes up to that protected place where averos have no entrance. It doesn't mean to say that averos have no effect. They do. They have an effect on the spiritual realm. They have an effect on the person himself. Yeah, and they can also have to be reckoned with, but separately from the mitzvahs. Right? It's not like, let's say a person does 10 mitzvahs, and he does 2 averos. So it's not like we say, he's left with 8 mitzvahs. The 2 averos cancel out 2 of the 10 mitzvahs. It doesn't work that way. The 10 mitzvahs that he does are preserved for him in the realm of mitzvahs, and they stay intact. The 2 averos are going to have to reckon with separately. Yeah? So it's not like, okay, well, I can afford to do some averos because I have a lot of mitzvahs. So I'll forgo 2 of the mitzvahs. And for example, the sin I'm giving. That's not true. It's not like the averos cancel out the mitzvahs and he's going to be left with enjoying 8. That's not true. He'll enjoy 10. But he's going to have to reckon with those 2. Those 2 cannot be nullified in that way. Each one is separate. Each goes to a separate realm, and each one is reckoned with separately. Umitam zeh lo yikach shochad shel mitzvos. For this reason, we say that God will not take mitzvos as bribery. What does this mean? Hamashal b'zeh, you can understand this with an allegory, an analogy. Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu omer, God doesn't say, Asa 40 mitzvos ve'eser averos. Okay. He uses the example. He brings the example that I just discussed, using different numbers. God doesn't say, okay, this person did 40 mitzvos and he did 10 averos. Nisharu 30 mitzvos. So he's got 30 remaining mitzvos, and the 10 are negated with the 10. No, God doesn't do that. He said that would be bribery. Yeah, God would be like letting a person off for the 10 because on account of the 40, leaving him with 30. No, God doesn't work that way. Chas v'shalom. Ella filu tzadi gomor v'osa avera chas. Even if you're a person who's, let's say, entirely righteous, but he did one avera. Domi lefonav ki ilusar v'estorah. As far as God's concerned, that one avera is tantamount to this righteous person's burning the Torah. What he means to say is it's very serious. We don't say it's considered to be insignificant compared to all of the mitzvahs that this person does. No. This one avera is viewed on its own account as being something very, very serious. And it's going to be continued to be viewed very seriously by God until the person pays his bill, accounting for that transgression. Then he will receive the full reward of all of his mitzvahs. So God says, you did 40? Fantastic. But there are 10 transgressions that have to be reckoned with. Reckon with those, and then you'll get the full degree of the 40. And why is this? This is coming out, this idea is being generated, I think, by the point that he said, that the mitzvahs go to a very high place. But God, in His mercy, yichvosh avnosav. That God suppresses our transgressions. He keeps them out of that realm, so they should not negatively affect that realm. The result of it is that mitzvahs are in one repository and the averas are in a different repository, and therefore both have to be reckoned separately. This is a great degree of righteousness, of mercy that God does for righteous people. Why? He doesn't negate the good things that a person does on account of the negative. And the reason is because the mitzvahs are very important and they have this quality of rising in front of God Himself. How can God possibly reduce or minimize the tremendous quality of the mitzvahs, which go so very high, right, through the currency of averos, which is something which is much more lower, much lower. there's no exchange rate, right? It's like apples and oranges. It's different things. You can't compare the two. Because the reward for transgressions, that's really a portion of Gehinnom. What is Gehinnom? That is the bed of spiritual energy that a person has created by transgressing, which he's required to lie in long enough to rectify and nullify the Averis. And it's a very low quality. But mitzvos, their reward is something which is very elevated. Ziva Shechina, the emanation of divine presence. How can you possibly kind of reckon one against the other? Like I said, it's like apples and oranges, like water and oil. They don't mix. It's two separate things. And therefore, we have to reckon with this here, and then the person gets his full reward for the mitzvahs that he does there. HaKadosh Baruch Hu hu govei chov ha'averos umaskir sechar kol mitzvos. So what God really does is He exacts payment of all of a person from all a person's liabilities, and afterwards He gives a person the full reward of his mitzvos. V'hainu, and this is what is meant by yichvosh avonosenu, that God suppresses our transgressions. He intentionally keeps these transgressions out of the higher sphere of the reward for mitzvos, in order that people should get a full reward of their mitzvos, without them being denigrated or nullified or negated through the transgressions that a person does. Shein ha'avon misgabrin lefonav v'mitzvos, so that you'll not have a scenario where a person's transgressions will somehow supersede a person's mitzvos. No. Rather, God depresses them down so that they will not rise there and they will not enter into that space. And this is then the eighth of God's 13 attributes of mercy. Yichvosh avonosenu. He quells, this is what he means by he quells our transgressions in order to give a person the full reward. It doesn't mean to say he quells them in the sense that he stamps them out as if they don't exist. But the point is, the world is created in a way where the soul reckons with them separately than from the mitzvos. Im hiyosh shehu mashgiach al darkei ish, insofar as God exerts divine providence over a person, hatov for ra, for good or for bad, or maybe it's talking about a good person or a bad person, im kol zeh hatov eino kovsho. Nevertheless, God does not repress the good, elapareach v'oile ad lemaod. Rather, it goes up and it flowers and blossoms very high. V'nichlal mitzvah v'mitzvah v'nivne mimeno binyan ulevush nichbad. What it does is it links mitzvah to mitzvah, building a great building of reward for a person, or alternatively, use the analogy of weaving, like one mitzvah being interwoven with the next, in order to create a levush, a garment, a very glorious garment that the person will become enveloped with in the spiritual realm. His soul will become enveloped with in the spiritual realm. Va'avonos ein lehem skulazo, but transgressions do not have this property. Elakovesh osam, rather he represses them. Shelo yatzlichu hatzlachazo, so they will not have this type of cumulative effect. V'lo yakansu pnima, and nor will they go into that inner realm. That's the quality of the Averos. We're talking about the analogy of the candle. So there's kind of an idea that in the candle you actually have the candle, which might be either wax or it might be oil. You've got the wick, and then you've got the flame, and then you've got the light. So these four components could be compared to, for example, the body, the nefesh, the ruach, and the neshama. The body would be the oil, or the wick would be the nefesh. that would be the nefesh. The ruach would actually be, the flame, and the light would be the neshama. The light would be the neshama, for example. So, what a person has to realize is that the more pure the body is, right, then the more easily that wick is going to be able to absorb that fuel, and the better quality flame that you'll be able to have, and the brighter the light it is that will be emanated. But if a person's body is impure because he's living an impure lifestyle or he's transgressing, so ultimately, right, the whole kind of flame, that whole kind of candle is going to be diminished. The light is going to be inferior. It's going to be setting off all types of noxious fumes and a dirty flame, and the light won't be very bright at all. So it's very important, in order to have the light and the illumination of spirituality radiate properly, that a person's body be pure as well, which means eating healthy food. It also means eating, for a Jew, kosher food. Right? It means using the other bodily functions properly, whether it be sleep or whether it be sexuality, whatever the case may be, so that the vessel, right, within which this flame, this wick, is resting, is of a pure, holy quality, and when it is, it results in a higher, more illuminating flame as well. So it's very important. Another kind of way of viewing that analogy, the 4, which is 5, is that the candle is really like the vessel. The vessel would be the body. The oil inside, that would actually be the nefesh, which is fueling the whole thing. Right? Like we said, that the nefesh energizes the body. The body's the encasement, so that would be like the vessel. The nefesh would be the oil. The ruach would be the wick, which is like a channel, right? And the flame would therefore be the neshama, right? And then the light, which is emanating from that, which is much more ethereal, would be the levels of soul, which are higher in yechidah. But in any case, either way you view the analogy, the message is still the same. So we're up to page Chaf Beis. Here, the author translates this now into practical terms. Va'af midazu tzarech ha'adam nisnaheg ba. In this attribute of God, a person must emulate himself and try and fulfill as well. How so? Shelo yichvosh toivas chavero. He should not suppress the good things that his friend does or says or thinks, or the good attributes or characteristics of another person. V'yiskor ha'asoi shegamalahu. And rather remember the bad things that he did, which is generally our nature. We generally find it very easy to forget the good things that people do for us, whereas the bad things that they've done against us stands out in our minds. If a person does something for you which is good, you might be thankful of it, but you're not particularly cognizant of it, and you tend to forget it. But if somebody harms you in some way, for as long as you see that person, it's human nature that you'll remember what it is that they did, how they wronged you. So we should go against that nature. That's not godlike. God does the exact opposite. He represses the negative things that a person does, keeps them separate from, elevating to his mind, as it were, the good things that a person does. So too, we should try and repress and quell the negative things that a person does and keep that separate, but rather hold in our mind more dearly the positive things that people do. Ela adrabah. Actually, the opposite is true. Yichvosh hara. He should suppress the evil, v'yishkachehu, and he should forget it, v'yiznechehu, and he should distance it from him, v'lo yagor b'magor ra, and he should not enable to dwell within him his recollection of this person's evil. He shouldn't allow it to come into the chamber, the upper chamber of his mind. V'tiha toiva sedura tomi defanav, but rather the good things about this person should rather be the ones that are at the forefront. V'yiskor lo hatoiva, and he should remember for himself or to this person the good deeds that he did for him. I remember, I'll never forget how you did that thing for me. Of course, it's not talking about always reminding the person of the good thing either, but from time to time, recalling. This is certainly true regarding one's parents. Right? So many people take for granted all of the things that the parents did for a child. A lot of it we weren't even cognizant of because we were infants. But how many sleepless nights our mothers spent taking care of our needs in the middle of the night, and how many hours our fathers expended away from home, the natural place that he'd like to be with his wife and his children in order to be earning money and supporting the family. And we, as children, took the food and we had our clothes laundered and we had our needs provided for, never, probably, ever, rarely ever saying thank you. Right? How common is it that children thank their mothers for doing the laundry or their fathers for doing the laundry? Thanks, Mom, for doing the laundry. Or, right? Dinner's good. But they often don't say thank you. And often mothers or wives have to say, how's dinner? Oh, it's great, Mom. Thanks. Yeah, but only because, right? We have so much to be thankful for to our parents. So much to be thankful for our parents. And even if, which is certainly the case because no human is perfect, even though our parents have faults, and as you grow older, you get to become more aware of those faults. Right? But even if they have faults, and even in some scenarios, even in some cases, the faults might be great. And even if those faults might cause great strain on our relationships with our parents, it's still fundamentally necessary, right, to be thankful for everything that they've done, they do for us. Right? And it would be strange and out of place to constantly be expressing thanks, but it's worthwhile at least once during every interaction that you have with your parents to express some gratitude in some way. They've done so much and they do so much for us, and it goes unrecognized. And the same thing with spouses, right? There's so much good that spouses do for one another, even if they have difficult times and they're fighting, or even if, as the marriage grows on, a person finds that there are, the person is not just all rosy. Like every person, he or she has some faults. Yeah, but despite of all that, there's so much good there. There's so much that's done, that's shared, and it really has to be recognized. And therefore, the point here is that the negative things should be repressed, and what should be brought constantly to the forefront should be the good things that other people have. V'yiskar lo ha'tova, v'yagbira lo al kol ha'masim. He should elevate the good things that a person does above all of the other things that he might have done against him. V'lo yikane b'liba v'yomer, and he shouldn't reckon one against the other by saying, Imasa li tova, hariyasa li ra, even if he did something good to me, but he's also harmed me. So that nullifies that. No. He says we learn from God's interaction with the world, with human beings, that that's not how it works. That's not how a person should behave. You shouldn't say, well, the good is discarded because of the bad. So they neutralize each other, cancel each other out. That's not true. Two separate things. V'yishkach ha'toiva. As a result of this, he would forget the good. No, you shouldn't do that. Lo yaseh ken. Ela bara yisratze, kol derech ritzu yishlichol. Regarding the evil, the harm, the damage, he should be appeased in the best way possible. But the good that he's done, he should never take out of his sights just because this person might have harmed him in other ways. And therefore, if he's blinding himself to something, he should blind himself to the evil, not to the good. And this would be paralleling the way that God suppresses our transgressions and rather keeps the good things that we do in a higher, more elevated place, much more in the forefront, ultimately in order to benefit the relationship that we have with God and not allow the transgressions to detract from it. And that's how we should be with other people as well. Okay, let's end here.